Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Voice in Your Future. Bruce Fein, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you.
Kash, Patel, thank you so much for joining us for tonight's broadcast. I see you're in your Nevada home. There he is. There's Kash. Hello, Kash. Welcome back to the broadcast.
Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let me start with you, Kash. How do you assess the legal strategies used by those defendants defending the actions of January 6th in relation to their constitutional implications? And you see, this case started with the Supreme Court last week. Could the Supreme Court's handling of cases related to January 6th insurrection set a new precedent for how similar future events are judged legally? Because they're asking questions which Biden's lawyers just cannot answer. They're fumbling the ball.
Look, as a former federal public defender and national security prosecutor, I've always been the first to say there are some individuals on January 6th that broke the law and did so in a pretty harsh way and need to be punished accordingly. But I also have said since day one, as a defendant of due process, that some of these individuals charged have been overcharged. And the perfect example now is the case before the Supreme Court, Armstrong, which you just talked about. What the Department of Justice has done, over 300 separate charging documents related to January 6th, is utilize a financial crime statute from the Enron era to say that the defendants in January 6th obstructed a federal proceeding. The problem is the statute from the financial era for Enron related to Arthur Anderson and their destruction of evidence when DOJ was investigating them for financial crimes. So the Supreme Court has put to the DOJ here in the Biden administration, what are we to do with that? Congress did not intend for this to apply to folks in terms of Capitol Hill hearings. But if Biden's administration is correct, the Supreme Court also asked, should we be arresting those that protest on Golden Gate Bridge or on 395 on the Beltway outside of D.C. and prevent justices and members of Congress from getting to the halls of the Capitol? Wouldn't that be obstruction of official proceedings? So they're in a very sticky situation, but I think the Constitution and the courts are clear that the financial crimes obstruction statute does not apply to January 6th defendants.
Bruce, where do you think this leads the fate of those that have been in prison?
Well, one observation, I was there at the oral argument and I heard all the questioning and the answers. And I think one of the hypotheticals that Kash has raised here were raised by Justice Alito. But ordinarily, that a defendant, as Kash knows, can only challenge as unconstitutional the statute as applied to his conduct. Which wasn't protesting on the Golden Gate Bridge or otherwise. On the other hand, even assuming that the conduct that was charged was just his and not hypotheticals, still there's a question under the statute whether the language obstructing an official proceeding refers only to proceedings that are obstructed by mutilating documents similar to what earmarked the Enron case. The questioning was very, very protracted on both sides. I would say the arguments in general, based upon the questioning, would indicate the court will rule in favor of Mr. Fisher. He was the one who brought the lawsuit, but probably a narrower decision than striking down the whole statute. Because there have been instances where the government has succeeded in prosecuting cases under the statute where persons made threats to try to prevent evidence from being presented to a grand jury. There wasn't a document. It was oral threats. Now, of course, that wasn't for the Supreme Court. Anyway, it's a kind of a sticky case. Now, what does it mean for the defendants here? We already have in the lower courts decisions saying that because of the Supreme Court pending case, they should be released. They shouldn't be held any longer. Because if the Supreme Court rules in favor of Mr. Fisher, then their convictions will be voided and they shouldn't have spent time improperly in prison. So they're being released now. You know, how quickly the Supreme Court decides, it usually ends its term at the very end of June, which is what, a couple months from now? But they may try to accelerate this decision if they feel others could be in prison.
Because of the cruelty of this, this will be accelerated. You know, speaking of the Supreme Court, Kash, this week they're hearing arguments that have profound legal and political implications and consequences. and it has to do with whether former President Donald Trump is immune from prosecution in a federal case charging him with plotting to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Now, in addition to establishing a potential historic ruling about the scope of presidential power, the court's decision, whenever it comes, maybe before the end of June, will undoubtedly, Kash, go a very long way in determining a trial date for the former president in one of 4 criminal prosecutions, let's say, that presumptive Republican presidential that he faces going ahead. How do you think all this is going to play out?
Well, look, the procedure when it comes to federal courts is that if a defendant is charged in multiple districts with multiple different charging documents, that is, he's charged in an indictment in California in one case and in New York in another, what happens is temporally the timeline comes into play. The judge with the first charge case takes priority under most federal jurisdictional procedural guidelines. And in my understanding of this case is the Florida case came first, so that would have to be resolved first. Now, I don't know that this DC judge, who has advocated herself to be somewhat of a political judge, is going to permit the norm to succeed. But putting aside that sequential ordering of which case comes first, you raise an important issue about presidential privilege. And I've come down on the side that a president does have privilege. And if the Supreme Court were to quash it in this instance, then they open themselves up to quashing in every instance of every succeeding precedent, but also every former precedent, should it be within the statute of limitations. And the one instance I always bring up, because I'm a national security guy, is what about the time when President Barack Obama drone struck an American citizen overseas without the lawful authority to do so? I believe President Obama has presidential privilege and acted appropriately under the circumstances they're at. But if the Supreme Court were to deny Donald Trump that right, then they would have to deny him and Joe Biden that right.
My experience is a little bit different than Kash's, because my baptism here was Watergate. Richard Nixon, while he was an incumbent, was charged as an unindicted co-conspirator. When he left office, it was clear Leon Jaworski was intending to indict him. If there wasn't a pardon was forthcoming. Nixon accepted the pardon. Why? Because he thought he was vulnerable to prosecution after he was no longer president. Now, it's true that in 234 years, we've never had this set of facts before, so the Supreme Court has never decided explicitly the issue that Kash has raised. Well, is a former president immune from prosecution for acts that were undertaken while he was president? The U.S. Department of Justice has twice opined, both in a Republican and a Democratic administration, that while a sitting president cannot be prosecuted or indicted, a former president can. But that's just OLC opinions, Office of Legal Counsel. So I think it's a very uphill battle for Mr. Trump to succeed. He didn't receive any support in the lower courts, but they're just lower courts. The Supreme Court is the ultimate decision maker.
So, Kash, how do you assess the legal strategies used by those defending the actions of January 6th in relation to their constitutional implications?
My main line where I come down every time, whether it's January 6th, murder, narco trafficking, or what have you, is, has due process been upheld? And to me, it's just surprising that so many on the left, from my past as a public defender, have jettisoned due process or allowed it to be selectively applied when it comes to individuals surrounding January 6th or Donald Trump supporters or Donald Trump himself. I've never been of the position that due process is supposed to be applied based on your political preferences or whatever is expedience for the times. And what we're seeing here in the Fisher case and the other cases here is that I think due process, and even in the Trump case in New York, in state court right now, that his due process rights with the gag order and other instances are being violated continuously based on political preferences. And that, to me, is just never what the Constitution has been about. I defended the worst that America had to offer. And if you can't defend them to the fullest extent of the Constitution, then no one has the due process rights enshrined in our Constitution.
Well, could the Supreme Court's handling of cases related to January 6th insurrection, Bruce, set a new precedent for how similar future events are judged legally?
Well, insurrection is not before the U.S. Supreme Court. They are not examining Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. we need to remember that this is almost unprecedented in 234 years. It's not at all usual for presidents to come with even shouting distance of criminality. In some sense, I know, because at Watergate, I was entrusted by then acting Attorney General Robert Burke, hey, look at impeachment and wrongdoing of presidents. Hadn't been examined since Andrew Johnson in 1868. So there was hardly any what we call fixed case law on the books here. I would hope that we'll never have anything like this again in another 100 years or so. So I think I might part company a little with Kash. I do not think that the precedented sense is going to mean that we have a revolution in the way in which presidents operate in the Oval Office.
You know, Kash, from your perspective, when you were in the Department of Defense, how was the response to the Capitol riot plan that they executed, and what could have been done differently?
Well, I think if you look at Biden's Inspector General report, they concluded that we, Donald Trump's Department of Defense department, acted appropriately, swiftly, and within accordance with the law. You know, we've been over this on your show many times, and now there's newer and newer testimony coming that the January 6th committee withheld. You know, but Donald Trump, whether you like it or not, authorized the National Guard days before January 6th, and we now know Pelosi for the Capitol Police and Mayor Bowser for D.C. declined it. We also now just learned that the Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, withheld or misled the January 6th committee on the timing of the release of the January 6th National Guard, because he just wanted to. And that information was kept from myself as Chief of Staff in the Department of Defense. So this information really brings to light a delay that was not brought about by Trump administration officials through some sort of scheme to delay the deployment of the National Guard, but one person who took it upon himself to hijack the National Command Authority and implement a strategic deployment of the National Guard in a way he saw fit, but in a way that was in contravention to the Secretary of Defense and the President. I think there's a lot more research and investigating that needs to be done here.
Your voice, your future. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. I don't know how closely you followed the Supreme Court justices today when they expressed concern about punishing homeless people for sleeping outside when they have nowhere else to go, while also struggling, Bruce, with how to ensure local and state leaders have flexibility to deal with this growing number of unhoused individuals nationwide. And you know, what's fascinating is that the court's review of a set of Oregon anti-camping laws could lead to the most significant ruling on the rights of the unhoused. It's interesting how we call it unhoused now. We no longer call it housing, with potentially sweeping implications for state capitals and city streets all across this country. And throughout a more than 2-hour argument, the justices seemed to divide along ideological lines, with conservatives who make up the court's majority suggesting that elected officials and lawmakers, not judges, should be setting local rules for dealing with homeless people.
Yeah, the precedent that really creates even the argument that you have a right not to be punished for violating law against camping on sidewalks concerned drug addiction. It's from California. California made drug addiction a crime. And this U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Robinson against California, held that violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, because it was punishing a status, drug addiction. But obviously, the status implied that the individual has been using drugs repeatedly. I think that that decision was probably wrongly decided, but it's still a precedent. I have no doubt that the court will hold that, yes, that states and localities do have rights to require that persons not obstruct a public welfare because there are associated with homelessness in public domain, crimes, being unpleasant, people can't walk outside their home. And it's very, very seldom, if ever, that the U.S. Supreme Court has placed an affirmative duty on government to do something as a right, rather than not do something to people exercising their liberty. But otherwise, this is, if the court rules otherwise, then the homeless problem will simply spiral into even worse situations.
You know, Kash, what was really telling today in Donald Trump's hush money trial in New York is that his defense is saying, well, there is nothing wrong with influencing elections. That's what we call democracy.
Well, look, he's not on trial for influencing an election. And you raise a great point. The prosecutor that opened up today's trial against Donald Trump, a former DOJ senior attorney who went to Alvin Bragg's office, literally told the jury that Donald Trump participated in a criminal conspiracy regarding the election. But here's the problem, and it goes back to due process. Donald Trump isn't charged with a single conspiracy in the indictment. Donald Trump isn't charged with a single measure of influence the election in any way, shape, or form. Donald Trump isn't even charged with the hush money case. This is a case involving a ledger recording by a secretary in Trump organization when Donald Trump was president as to whether or not Donald Trump made a payment to a lawyer. And so the amount of rhetoric that has been able to be thrown around in the courts, in the media, it's one thing, but in the court itself to the jury, I think that is a violation of Donald Trump's due process rights alone. And when people start saying, you know, this case has to do with election engineering or election influence or what have you, it has nothing to do with that. But that statement has everything to do with tainting not just the jury in the courtroom, but the jury in the United States of America.
But I think there may be a little bit more. The New York law, anyway, makes it a felony when a fraudulent document is utilized for the purpose of evading another prohibition.
Are you saying that the document is fraudulent?
Well, because it characterized as legal fees what was money paid to Stormy Daniels to have her not speak. Those are not legal fees. And Michael Cohen himself will testify to that because he's the one who put them out.
Michael Cohen, one of the things that we learned from the defense today is that Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels' credibility is on trial.
Of course, we're just talking about what the theory of the case is, and that he'll say that the $130,000 was not legal fees, that he'd performed no legal work for that money. And the money was handed over to Stormy Daniels. You know, you can disbelieve him, and that's why we have trials.
But do you believe that he ran a porn star payroll scheme to impact the elections? Because that's what
well, that's
a stretch.
It is. There are multiple possible motivations. Most of people act with on any serious question with multiple motivations.
Do you think he really had in mind to use a porn star to corrupt the election?
It wasn't that. It wasn't in isolation. The theory is this, and I'm just trying to explain the theory, not to justify it. It came on the heels of Access Hollywood tape, and so it put Trump in kind of a frightening mode. You know, it looks like he could use the women's vote. And the last thing he wanted to see the next day is Stormy Daniels out there compounding the problem created by the Access Hollywood tape. Now, is that most persuasive? That's why we have trials. But it's not completely loony. And the issue here is, of course, you have a right to persuade voters to vote one way. That's what the whole campaign is about. But notwithstanding that, we do have rules. The Hatch Act, Kash knows that. You're a federal employee. If you try to influence the outcome of an election using federal resources, that can be a crime under Section 610 of the Federal Criminal Code, as Kash knows. And also, in this particular instance, the theory of the case is that the money would have been an illegal campaign contribution because it was an expenditure intended to influence the outcome of the case in an amount that's far above the federal ceiling. Again, I want to underscore, this is the theory. The jury's got to decide. I want to wait and see what the cross-examination looks like before I would opine one way or the other. But I would disagree that it's so off the wall that the judge has been wrong in not dismissing it before it even gets to a trial.
Kash, what do you make of the Texas appeal court today siding with Sidney Powell?
Well, Sidney Powell, that's not even a segue. But Look, she, like every other defendant in the country, whether you believe her or her political preferences or who she's defended in the past, has the same application of due process. And I think in this instance, the Texas Supreme Court or the appellate division, I forget what it's called down in Texas, got it right. And, you know, we need these types of decisions in the hardest of times so that the law lives on and not political rhetoric. And, you know, whether it's Donald Trump's case in New York, Sidney Powell's case in Texas, or what have you, there have been very few courts willing to make the difficult decision and many justices willing to make the easy decision. And that, to me, is when justice is hurt the most for our future generations. So I think this one's a win.
Were you surprised that when the judge said that Trump's $175 million bond with the insurance company is legitimate and go forward? I just thought Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, lost a lot of credibility in trying to inject this technicality into.
But Armstrong, today what happened was that her office said, as long as you put in 4 or 5 stipulations to make sure the cash stayed there, they were agreeable. The 175
That's not what she
could
was
do
saying
that.
before.
Okay, but that's what she said today.
But she had to, because she realized she was going to lose this.
Okay,
let's be honest about this. Okay,
I know,
okay, please.
But that's why we have justice. What Kash calls due process.
She showed her hand.
Yeah, of course,
her
yeah,
agenda.
Yeah, I agree with that. But ultimately, that happens oftentimes in court, and that's why you have due process and you have appeals and you go back and forth. I'm not trying to exonerate her from initially protesting, but she ultimately capitulated on the major issue. The 175 is good enough.
Because I'm sure the judge told her, you're going to lose this. That's what happened to Kash. He brought her to her senses. Help me on another topic. It seems as though Marjorie Taylor Greene capitulated today against Speaker Johnson. What is she trying to do? I mean, doesn't the people want bipartisanship? I mean, I understand you may not want 100% support for Ukraine, but look, from McConnell to Johnson to former speakers of the House, they all want to give a little more to Ukraine. They feel it's in our best interest in the long run. I mean, this is a very principled position for the Speaker of the House, and he put it all on the line.
But it's also a principled position to disagree with that, right?
Yes,
and I agree with you that we want bicameral legislation when possible, and those that are out there saying that we need to provide this aid to the Ukraine, that's their right to believe that. I disagree with that because I want some aid going more to, say, our veterans and teachers and first responders. And if we got enough left over, then let's send it overseas. And I think that's the crux of the argument. I'm not sure that politicals on Capitol Hill are winning any points by taking the extremes on this one. And I think what you're highlighting is a political miscalculation by some, whether or not you disagree with the issue. I've always said that providing assistance to our allies is key only if and when and after we take care of things at home. And our home right now is a mess. So I disagree with that age package, but I understand what you're saying.
I know we're going to say goodbye to you, Kash, and Bruce is going to stay with us as we talk about this law and order Archbishop who wants to arm his parishioners because he doesn't trust the governor and the mayor and law enforcement. So I'm looking forward to that. Your final thoughts on something we did not talk about here today that's important, Kash?
I get asked a lot about the system of justice, and I think what we've learned in the past 4, 5, 6 years is that a lot more people are paying attention to the system of justice. I just wish a lot more people would apply the system of justice systematically and uniformly and not in a two-tier fashion. Because to me, as a constitutionalist, as a federal prosecutor, as a national security guy, if we don't have a singular system of justice, we don't have a constitutional republic anymore. And I think that's why everybody's paying attention, and hopefully we can move back towards that.
I always believed that no weapon could penetrate you, but obviously something got a hold of your arm and has made you human. I see that you're in a sling. I cannot ignore that. And you look human tonight. But however, you're still with us. And I appreciate seeing the human side of you. We wish you well. And it's always a pleasure having you on. And thank you so much for joining us, Kash.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Thank you.
You don't book? You want to plug your book? You have a book?
Oh, yeah. Government Gangsters,
Okay.
bestseller. Basically the blueprint on the deep state and Announcement Armstrong. We're making the movie and it's releasing next month. So get your copy of Government Gangsters, our bestseller that we just released, governmentgangsters.com or Amazon, and then look for the movie next month.
I'm not going to have a TV cameo in the movie?
Well, hey, I can't let all the secrets out now.
Okay, Kash. We'll be back with much more on Your Voice, Your Future. Stay tuned.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. I've debated and contemplated whether or not firearms keep people safe. Hard numbers would show that more firearms do not keep people safe. And why do so many Americans, including myself, believe the opposite? I think it's all about how you ask the question, actually. Because I refuse to believe that if someone knows that you're going to an area where firearms are allowed, statistics have shown that less crime is committed versus an area where no guns are allowed. And you don't hear of people breaking in homes where they know they have firearms or an attack dog like a German Shepherd or Pit Bull. So, I was looking forward to having this conversation. Erich Pratt, Senior Vice President for Gun Owners of America, is joining us. Oh, there's the bishop, the Archbishop. No, that's Bruce Fein. I'm so confused, man. I thought I was looking at my, here we go. I'm having one of my moments. Erich Pratt, welcome back to the broadcast. You heard my argument in the beginning. Are people less safe or more safe with more or less guns? Erich?
I can't hear.
Bruce, what do you, you've studied this issue.
I think that it may vary. That is, if you have a proliferation of guns, it may well be that even in the home, people who aren't planning to commit crimes, but in moments of anger, dispute, they have a gun there, they pick it up and they use it. And it may well be, and we see how even children in recent years, they're like a 6th grader or something in Virginia, took a gun to school in a knapsack and shot his teacher. But I don't think he could plan a crime like an adult does. So it may well be that for what you might call crimes of passion, using guns because of a temporary anger and fury, the availability of guns is an easy way to try to express your anger. And if there are fewer guns, that wouldn't happen. But that's not inconsistent with saying that insofar as guns are available and can be utilized against criminals who are planning criminal activity and may deter them because they can actually make a calculation. They're not shooting just at the spur of the moment that, no, I don't want to go there. I need to go to the vulnerable areas that don't have guns because here I'd be risk being shot.
Erich, Dexter Burke, who was a pastor in Connecticut, you followed his story.
Yes.
He feels law enforcement is not working. The governor's policies are not working. Prayer vigils are not working. And a prayer vigil works until the next murder. And so what is your stance on the effectiveness of armed community patrols, which is what he's advocating, to deter crime compared to other forms of community policing? What is most effective?
Well, in regard to the prayer vigils, remember, we're told to pray for our daily bread, but then we're also told if you do not work, you shall not eat. So at the same time that prayer is effective, we also have a responsibility. And that's what I love about what Pastor Burke is doing, in that, you know, this story with armed citizens, they are helping a community feel safe. And, you know, one of the things I saw that he'd pointed out previously is that neighbors weren't reporting crimes. You know, they were not working with the police because presumably they were scared of retaliation from the thugs. I mean, I get that. And, you know, the Supreme Court has said that police are not duty bound to protect you as an individual, which means that in dangerous neighborhoods, people will live in fear because they can't rely on the police to be their security detail. But what's happening there in Hartford is that the self-defense patrols are making people feel safe. And that's the game changer, because once they feel safe, once they know they won't be subject to retaliation because they reported a crime, that now helps the police to do their jobs so they can get eyewitness reports and arrest the bad guys. And it's all because private citizens are exercising their Second Amendment protected right to carry firearms. So kudos to Pastor Burke for what he started there in that community.
And you know, it goes without saying that the parishioners are well trained. They understand the consequences of carrying a firearm. But you know, they get to the point where they're just fed up because they're being impacted more by this crime than anybody else. They have more at stake, they have more to lose, and they have more to gain. And like you said, law enforcement does not have an absolute obligation to protect you. And if that being the case, you're going to do your best to protect yourself, your family, your community, and the things that you work hard for. And I don't know why the governor and others push back so much on people bearing arms. I mean, to me, I know people who've said they would never touch a gun, they would never pull a trigger. You take them to the fire range, they pull that trigger 3 or 4 times, and oh my God, they fall in love with it. And they go out and get a firearm and they feel safe, even though they may never use it. The fact that you have that firearm and you've been well trained for it and you continue to be trained for it, it gives you an option if your life and your family's life is threatened.
Yeah.
Yeah, Armstrong, I could just interject here. That's the foundation of the Supreme Court's decision saying that there's an individual right to bear arms under the Second Amendment, what you just explained. So that there is a right of those citizens to have it. I don't know how the governors, after the New York Rifle Association case, can complain about citizens exercising their Second Amendment rights. It's quite perverse.
I mean, just look at the case in Australia where someone didn't need a firearm, did a machete, a knife, and they just killed children, cut babies in half. If somebody's going to kill, they're going to kill you, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's a knife, whether it's a fork, whatever. Sometimes with your bare hand. But how do you respond, Erich, to concerns about this potential for increased violence and accidents when civilians are engaged and encouraged to take active security roles? I mean, who's coming up with this? What is their agenda?
You're hitting the nail on the head. The agenda is there are people who simply don't like firearms. They want to ban firearms. And the truth is, Armstrong, the places in our country that have the most restrictions on firearms are the places that are the most dangerous. I mean, look at what's happening in Chicago. Every weekend, you're seeing 20, 30 people shot. Many people killed. You know, they shouldn't have a gun problem because they have such strict gun control laws. Same thing in Baltimore, same thing in city after city. No, what we see in the places where people are able to take responsibility and secure their own defense, those are the safest places. And, you know, it's interesting. What Pastor Burke is doing here is really squarely rooted in American history. I mean, we've come back full circle. There used to be a time in our country when everyone was involved in helping protect the peace. You know, the closest we come to that today is something like the America's Most Wanted show, right? Where people see a story about a wanted criminal and they phone it in if they've seen him. But in the past, the American public was much more involved. Realize the first statewide police agency was not formed until 1844. Before that, everybody took part in helping, capture the bad guys. In fact, one of the famous visitors to our country, Alexis de Tocqueville, he came to this country in the 1830s. That was before our first statewide police force, and he wrote about this in his very famous book, Democracy in America. He was astounded by our system of justice because he said back in France, the people were just spectators watching the authorities chase the police. But he said that in America truly had the best track record of all the countries when it came to bringing criminals to justice. Why? Because everyone was involved and the criminals had no place to hide. And so it's no wonder that the people of Hartford now feel safer with armed citizens patrolling the neighborhoods.
If I could ask one question here, you know, you're the expert. How frequently, and maybe it's large or small or medium, are crimes of passion, do they involve firearms where someone is shot because of a dispute over a marriage problem, intimate family problem, something like that? Is that very rare? Is it common, or what? You are the one who knows.
Well, typically a crime of passion is going to occur with anything that the person has there available. So it could be a firearm, it could be a knife. I mean, knives and fists and clubs and hammers kill far more often than the famed assault weapons that many politicians are trying to ban. You look at the FBI statistics, actually, we have a greater chance of dying by common objects around the house. So in all honesty, in terms of a crime of passion there, certainly if I'm a woman, my best defense is going to be able to have a firearm. It's such a perverse thing how gun control will be used to disarm the victims. A man in California who was cheating on his wife red flagged his wife in order to disarm her when he saw how upset it had made. His cheating had made her. He used the red flag law to disarm her. I mean, that's the problem with gun control, is it disarms the victims rather than empowering the potential victims.
It's just, when we come back, I really want to engage Erich and Bruce into what has really changed with this surge in youth violence, these babies, these kids. I mean, you look at the videos where kids slap teachers in the classroom, they punch teachers. They're just so violent. And you can be sent home from school for misgendering somebody's name, but yet you can punch a teacher and smack them and nothing happens. You remain on the school ground. I mean, teachers are living in violent communities. These classrooms have become some of the most violent places in America. And you ask, when you begin to see this kind of behavior, you don't think it's going to escalate to what you're seeing now with homicide and the guns? It's just a matter of time. If you don't nip it in the bud early, this is exactly what it's going to become. But what is it saying about parenting? What does it say about our government? And listen, Erich, it's all over this country. It has become an epidemic, this crime, that no one wants to acknowledge, and it's not getting any better. And nothing seems to change and nothing seems to slow it. We're going to talk about that and much more when we return with Erich Pratt and Bruce Fein on Your Voice, Your Future.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
And Archbishop Dexter Burke is joining us now, Walking in the Light Church of God on Garden Street in Hartford, Connecticut. Thank you so much for joining us. Are you surprised at the kind of pushback that you've gotten on trying to arm your congregation in a very responsible way? Because obviously crime is not getting any better. It has more of an impact on your community. And obviously this is the last thing you wanted to implement, but you've got to protect your community because you're their leader.
Absolutely. And the way I see it, when we've tried several methods with the governor, with the mayor, we've approached them. It seems as though they're either unwilling or unable to curb the flow of violence and crime. And therefore, I believe under the protection of the founding fathers, we utilize the Second Amendment in arming the civilians to patrol and safeguard their own community. When government fail, I believe it is the right of every citizen to protect themselves. And that's exactly what we're empowering the people to do. We're getting a lot of pushback. I don't think it's surprising. These individuals, they want to have it that way. You hear a lot of prayer and prayer vigils. I'm a pastor, so naturally prayer is something I do daily. But I also believe that you have to do something else. Faith without works is dead. And if we pray for 30 years and we see the crime not going down, but it's increasing, it's telling us something. The Bible says that an effectual, fervent prayer of the righteous availeth much. And so when these guys are praying and all in prayer vigils after the death, after the shooting, after a killing, and waiting for it to happen again and go back and do the same thing, I think it's a waste of time, and I just think it's foolishness.
Discuss with us the role of the faith-based organizations in promoting safety and community in areas with such high crime rates. And why do you think it continues to escalate among our youth? They're becoming more and more violent and more dangerous, heartless, no compassion.
I think our young people need role models and genuine role models, and I think that's lacking. I think there are programs that are missing and employment that they need. They need stiffer and harsher penalties in the judicial system that will deter them from committing those crimes. And I think the role of the church is to stand up and speak out in the face of injustice and crime and evil. That's the role of the church, to speak up against evil. And when these young men and women are committing crimes and they're going and running in neighborhoods and in homes and shooting people and killing them, I believe the role of the church should be to stand up, to let them know, to let the legislators know, and to let the community know that there's something that they can do to put a stop to it. And if the church is failing in that regard, I think then the church has failed and we've dropped our mandate, is what we're supposed to do as a church.
How does your church reconcile the need for armed community patrols, Archbishop, with the principles of peace and forgiveness taught by your faith?
Well, what we're doing in many ways, I think we're approaching these criminals, and we've spoken to them. We've had conversations with them. We've had dialogue with them. And I believe that in our faith, the Lord say that right now, He is a merciful God, but when He comes, He'll be a judge. And I believe that after speaking words of love and consideration and giving them an alternative to crime, and they continue to go down that path, I think to continue to just pray and hold vigils is enabling them to do the evil that they're committing. So I think this is called tough love, and that's what we're giving them.
Go ahead, Erich, you were about to say something?
Well, I would just add to that, excellent answer from Pastor Burke, and I would just point out, in Luke chapter 22, verse 36, Jesus told His disciples if they didn't have a sword, to sell their cloak and buy one. And so, the idea that we're just supposed to lay down and let evil run over us is not an idea that comes out of Christianity. What Pastor Burke is talking about is not taking vengeance on people. That's the job of the government, to punish. What he's talking about is defending themselves, defending women and children so that they can be safe. Those are two totally separate things, vengeance and self-defense. So again, kudos to Archbishop Duke for everything that he's doing there in Connecticut.
You know, Pastor Burke, one of the things you have to realize is the reason why the criminals want you to fail, because they're really running a criminal enterprise. They're corrupting these kids, engaging them in immorality and everything that goes against what you want in terms of how you raise men into citizens and how you raise women into ladies and to carry on the legacies of those traditional families where you have both parents in a household. And say they would like you to fail because crime is a business for them, and their goal is to corrupt as many of those young kids and some adults in that community as they can. And you've got to stop this because it becomes pure evil.
Absolutely. And, you know, what we say to them always is if you want to hold a gun and go fight, join the military. You have a lot of opportunities to do that. But in this community, you're just not going to do that, right? And I think the mayor and the governor and those elected officials here in Connecticut are empowering them by just giving them a slap on the wrist and working against those who are trying to protect the community. And, you know, I just don't understand it. You know, we're trying to do the job to protect the citizens, and the government has a responsibility to protect women, children, and those within the confines of their community who are law-abiding citizens against these criminal thugs. And they're just not doing that.
I think the missing point here is the obligation of the parents to raise the kids. It's not like they have far more control than the gangs do. I mean, they're their kids. They got supervision and custody of them 24 hours a day. Where are the parents inculcating the values that would cause them to desist any overtures from criminals? Not only desist, report the criminals to the police. That is something that every parent should feel obliged, whether it's mandated by law or by concepts of justice or morality. Because that's where the problem begins. It was pointed out by the bishop, role models. The most important role model that a child has is the parent. See them all the time. Now the parent, unfortunately today, very seldom spends the amount of time reading, inculcating values with the children, and they just get hijacked by the criminals and the gangs that you've described. But they would resist the hijacking if they were properly raised.
Bishop?
30 years ago, the very parents of these children were the children doing the same nonsense in the streets, and the government failed to do anything to correct that problem. And so the children now are doing exactly what they've been taught by their role models in their parents. And so we are asking the government, we're asking the mayor to say, look, seeing your policies have failed those children parents, and you're failing them. We want to put a system in place to protect those who we care about. Since you don't care about anyone, we care about these people and we want to protect them. And I think that's what we're doing, in the hope that when we go out in the street and protect the street, they will see role models in us and then come along that way.
I think it's so important that you share stories of the successes and the triumphs that you've had with this model that you're implementing.
And so what we've seen since we started, the folks in the area are traditionally not willing to communicate with police. They're called snitches when they do that. And so they're not willing to share information and data with police. So what we've done, we've installed security ring cameras on several homes, I think 70-something homes. We've also purchased 12 drones, and 14 drones actually. And we've purchased body-worn cameras. What we're doing now with the information that we gather, we're providing that now to law enforcement, who will then have an obligation to make arrests, and they just can't say they don't have it, right? So they have the evidence there to make that. And we have citizens from that have started an area block watch, and they're reporting stuff that is happening in the community. So we've seen many persons have become empowered to speak up against these thugs and these rebels, and are saying, look, enough is enough. We're taking our streets and our community back, and I think that's important.
Erich, why is that so important?
Because you just can't continue living in fear. And it's clear that passing laws saying, bad guys can't have guns in certain areas, that doesn't work. If anything, that acts as a magnet for them. That's why 94% of mass shootings occur in gun-free zones. So what the Pastor Burke is doing here is taking away the free-for-all that they otherwise would have. And now he's raised the cost for them and really turned the tables on them. And that makes all the difference in the world.
Pastor, what would you say to others, people in communities watching this broadcast tonight, if they wanted to also implement the same? How do they get started against the forces that would like to see you fail?
I think it's very easy. As long as you're working within the perimeters of the law, you have a right, you have an obligation to protect yourself. And as long as you do that, what we've found is to get at least 10 neighborhood individuals who are willing and who are not afraid of the system. And it's going to say, we're committed to doing this, and just start like that. That's what we've done. And we've not only started on Garden Street, but we've just expanded to the entire Hartford, Connecticut. So just this week, we were able to expand. So folks are interested in it. Folks want it. You just have to introduce it and educate them on what's happening. No one wants to live in fear. No one wants to be scared to go in their own home, in their own community, and be fearful of their children, their wives, their senior parents being abused, being crime, violence. No one wants that. So if you give them the opportunity to have peace and safety, I think they'll take it.
And also the impact that it's already having on young people in the community, that crime does not pay, and they have alternatives, they have options, Pastor, in the last 30 seconds that we have left.
Yes, young people need something to do, and I think more than anything else, I think just doing this is putting fear in those who would want to turn to crime, because they're saying, no, this might not be the way. These guys are serious. They're not playing with us like law enforcement are doing. They're not playing with us. They're serious. And I think it deters it. It encourages them to do something positive. And I think I would encourage every community throughout the United States to follow suit and do the same thing. Arm yourself. Take care of your community. Police cannot do it for you alone.
You know, I'm going to take your advice. But we appreciate having you. Thank you for what you do. Erich, Pratt, thank you for joining us. Bruce Fein, Kash, Patel, WJLA 24/7. Enjoy the rest of your night. I'm Armstrong Williams.